Hey friends, I hope your week is off to a great start. Today I'm going to be attempting Bon Appetit's salty chocolate chunk shortbread cookie. So a couple weeks ago I tested Chris Morocco's chocolate chip cookie and you all really seemed to like that. So I wanted to give you a new alternative to just kind of a classic chocolate chip cookie. And I thought this shortbread version was kind of fun. You've seen me do shortbread cookies in the past, first with Chris Morocco's zebra cookie, then with my spin on that recipe, the rainbow unicorn shortbread cookie. So this recipe today is completely different and was developed by Alison Roman. You don't see Alison in the Bon Appetit test kitchen too often these days, but she does show up on BA's Instagram lives every now and then. So I do these Bon Appetit recipe tests every Wednesday. If you like this one, please be sure to give me a big thumbs up and click subscribe. Without any further ado, let's see how this goes. As always, I'll leave a link to the recipe and ingredient quantities in the description box below. As I typically do, I'm starting off by measuring out my dry ingredients. In this recipe, that is only flour. Next, I'm chopping up some dark chocolate. You can use bittersweet or semi-sweet depending what you're in the mood for. I've found that it's easiest to chop chocolate using a serrated knife, so that's what I'm using here. You don't want to chop the chocolate too small. You want these pieces to be substantial enough that they kind of hold together during the mixing and baking process. So about a centimeter by centimeter is kind of what I was targeting. The shortbread comes together pretty quickly. It's just a matter of combining the wet ingredients, which includes both of the sugars, the vanilla extract, and then the butter in the bowl of a stand mixer. And you're just going to cream this until it's super light and fluffy, about 5 minutes. Now this recipe is interesting for two reasons. First, there are no eggs in the cookie dough, so that's kind of a departure from what you'll typically see. And second, this recipe is using salted butter rather than unsalted butter with kosher salt. So it's a pretty big departure from what Bon Appetit typically calls for. And the rationale for that, according to the recipe write-up, is that using salted butter gets the salty flavor kind of deeper into the background of the cookie. Not sure whether that's true or not, but it does cut down on the number of ingredients that you need to purchase. So you can see that the butter mixture is super light and fluffy. So at this point on low speed, I'm just pouring in the flour, letting this incorporate. At this point, you really don't want to overmix because that will develop the gluten in this dough and will make it a little bit tough. So you want to mix the absolute bare minimum to get that flour incorporated. Once the flour is evenly incorporated, dump in the chocolate and just mix it quickly to get it all combined. So the texture of this shortbread dough was pretty interesting. It was a little bit on the dry and crumbly side, but it was sticky at the same time. So it was an interesting combination to work with. So next, you're just roughly dividing the dough between two pieces of cling film, and you're gonna roll this up into logs. So if you watch the zebra cookie video, this is a similar process to what we were doing there in terms of the log formation. So what you're looking for is to roll this up to about a 2¼ inch diameter. And for me, that resulted in the logs being about 7 inches long. So you want to just roll this back and forth, get it kind of evenly compressed, get those ends kind of squared up so they don't taper down too much. You're going to do the exact same process for the second log of cookie dough. If the dough is kind of crumbling apart, you can just push it into a ball and it will stick to itself, so that is helpful. And I was just really curious whether I did a good job kind of eyeballing half the dough. So I did weigh my logs at the end. The first log weighed 469 grams and the second was 449 grams. So overall, I feel like I did a pretty great job getting an even weight between the two logs. So if you're keeping score at home, about 460 grams is the sweet spot you want to target. Once the dough is chilled for about 2 hours, you can pull that out of the refrigerator and just brush the surface of the dough log with a beaten egg. This is just allowing the Demerara sugar to stick to the outside of the cookie dough. It also gives some nice crispiness to the outside of the cookie while baking. So you can either roll the log in a pile of sugar or sprinkle the sugar over the top, or a combination of both, which is what I tried. Now, when it comes to slicing, I ran into some serious issues on this first log. So I think that my knife was hitting the chunks of chocolate, and rather than kind of rocking the knife back and forth, I tried to just power through. So my tip to you is, if you encounter a chunk of chocolate when slicing the cookies, rock the knife back and forth, kind of do a sawing motion, and that will give you a better result of cleanly cutting through the chocolate without shattering the dough. Once you finish that first log of cookie dough, you're going to repeat the exact same process, but this time you're a little bit older, a little bit wiser, and hopefully you'll have better luck slicing the cookies. I definitely had a better slicing experience on the second log of cookie dough, so hopefully you will as well. And then the final step before baking is just sprinkling with some flaky sea salt. And you want to bake the cookies on the middle rack of your oven, rotating halfway through the bake time. You're not looking for a lot of color pickup, just a slight golden brown around the perimeter. All right, so the cookies are out of the oven. They've been cooling on their trays for about 20-25 minutes, so they are cool to the touch. And this is what they look like. So you can see nice presence of chocolate on the top, that crispy edge. It's a little bit shimmery, it's not really showing up on camera too well. And then the bottom is just ever so slightly starting to get a little bit golden. So I think the appearance of this is pretty nice. So the cookies are not very uniform across the board. You saw me struggle while cutting them. So this is no huge surprise. So this one's definitely pretty. I'm gonna eat one of the ugly ones though. So kind of ugly, it's a little bit beat up. This was one of the end pieces, but I think all the components are still there. So let's see how this tastes. Good. So that crispy sugar on the outside gives a nice contrast to the really tender, buttery, kind of crumbly shortbread. And then the little pockets of chocolate in there are just right. I was kind of irritated slicing the logs because the chocolate was really kind of an obstacle. But having the big pieces of chocolate gives you some nice kind of puddly, pooly action happening inside the cookie. So I do like the overall texture that's going on here. So I'm surprisingly happy with how these cookies turned out. While I was slicing them, I was really frustrated with how my dough was just kind of crumbling apart. And my fear was that the cookies were gonna bake and look just like a regular chocolate chip cookie. However, that's not the case. You can clearly tell that these are a little bit special and the flavor is great. So I would definitely recommend you give these a try. Overall, A+. So I really hope you enjoyed this week's video. If you did, please be sure to give me a big thumbs up and click subscribe. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next week.